I'm in the middle of a book tour, and so I've sort of been doing quite a bit of traveling. So if I become a little incoherent, I ask you to please be understanding.
These are humble words from a woman whose ability to express herself has earned her wide acclaim all over the world. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie stopped at Kepler's bookstore in Menlo Park on June 30th, along her book tour to read to eager listeners from her latest collection of short stories entitled The Thing Around Your Neck. Adichie tells the story of Nigerian immigrants, much like herself, who face the tough realities of straddling American and Nigerian identity. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie was born in 1977 in Enugu, Nigeria, and grew up in Nsukka. At the age of 19, Chimamanda left for the United States. At the moment, she divides her time between Lagos, Nigeria, and Maryland in the United States.
I'm going to read a short section from the title story, The Thing Around Your Neck.
Chimamanda says she wrote the first draft of this story 8 or 9 years ago, and it's gone through a number of revisions and rewritings since then. It's told in the second person, and it's about a young Nigerian woman who wins the American visa luxury and comes to the U.S.
You knew you had become close to him when you told him that your father was really not a school teacher in Lagos, that he was a junior driver for a construction company. And you told him about that day in Lagos traffic, in the rickety Peugeot 504 your father drove. It was raining and your seat was wet because of the rust-eaten hole in the roof. The traffic was heavy. The traffic was always heavy in Lagos, and when it rained, it was chaos. The rain, the swampiness, you thought, made your father step on the brakes too late that day. You heard the bump before you felt it. The car your father rammed into was wide, foreign, and dark green. Your father started to cry and beg even before he got out of the car and laid himself flat on the road, causing much blowing of horns. Sorry, sir, he chanted. If you sell me and my family, you cannot buy even one tire in your car. Sorry, sir. The big man, seated at the back, did not come out, but his driver did, examining the damage, looking at your father's sprawled form from the corner of his eye, as though the pleading was like pornography, a performance he was ashamed to admit he enjoyed. At last he let your father go, waved him away. The other car's horns blew and drivers cursed. When your father came back into the car, you refused to look at him, because he was just like the pigs that wallowed in the marshes around the market. Your father looked like Nsi, shit. After you told him this, he pursed his lips and held your hand and said he understood how you felt. You shook your hand free, suddenly annoyed, because he thought the world was, or ought to be, full of people like him. You told him there was nothing to understand. It was just the way it was.
After reading from her book, The Thing Around Your Neck, for about 45 minutes, Chimamanda engaged the audience in a Q&A session.
The things that fascinates me is about the arc of the story and the way you use the line.
It's a very moving thing to see people, to just observe the American embassy in Lagos in particular, particularly under military rule in Nigeria, so this was sort of early 90s and mid 90s, because so you would have Nigerian soldiers outside the American embassy ostensibly keeping the peace, but really abusing people. And it always struck me as quite interesting because, I mean, it was quite clear that the people inside the American embassy building knew what was going on, but you know, they didn't have any reason to care, I suppose. And I think for the genesis of the story really was me standing in that line and just watching and observing and wondering what people's stories were. And then I had also read, living in Nigeria under the dictatorship of General Abacha meant that every day you heard a story about somebody who had disappeared, somebody who had been locked up for no reason except for that they maybe wrote a little piece in a newspaper and that sort of thing. So I think it was standing in that line, sort of watching people and then wondering what their stories were, constantly go back and slowly lead the reader into the world of this woman's internal world, the world of her mind, and to know what the burden that she was carrying standing in that line.
Were
Where's your brother now?
That was fiction. I have 3 brothers. The brother in which the story is loosely, but only loosely based, is in Lagos at the moment, and this is a story that he detests.
So how much of those 2 books were based on fact, were based on either knowledge that you had about others or knowledge about your own life?
I find that constantly when I say to people, particularly Nigerians, when I say to them, no, it really isn't my story, they look at me like, she doesn't want to tell the truth, you know? And I think in some ways the reason I could write particularly a father character like that is because my father was nothing like that.
Chimamanda is able to write fiction that strikes a familiar chord with many Nigerians. Many audience members noted that they learned about the Biafran War, a difficult topic of Nigerian history that took place from 1967 to 1970, through Chimamanda's previous novel, Half of a Yellow Sun.
Such a powerful book. I would never have been able to read that in a nonfiction venue, so thank you for enlightening me.
All 3 going into my classroom.
I'm Nigerian, but I just wanted to say thank you so much. It's really hard to find literature covering the Biafran War. That's actually how I just discovered you.
Half of a Yellow Sun was very different. Half of a Yellow Sun was a very difficult book to write for me in many ways, because I knew I was writing a book based on my country's history, my family's history. My grandfathers died in Biafra. My parents lost not only everything they owned, they lost their innocence.
Chimamanda has an interesting story of her own path to becoming a writer, after switching from her original aim of becoming a psychiatrist.
The dean of the medical school said to him, oh, she must have failed a course, or something must be wrong, she can't just be leaving. And so my father, who, despite all of his sort of calm reservations, is still very much the proud papa. So he said, you know, I will show you her file, she's a straight A student. You know, so don't think my daughter is living in shame or anything. And then I came to the US and I just sort of decided that I wanted to get published. I mean, I had been published in Nigeria before then. I'd written a really bad play and a really bad poetry collection. But I decided that I wanted to publish my fiction, and I sort of went out of my way to research how to get published. I really didn't seek out a mentor. I don't know if it didn't occur to me, or maybe it just didn't make sense. I was in a small town in Connecticut. I was living with my sister. I was my sister's unpaid housekeeper. I was in school. I just didn't have time to, you know, and so I just wrote this book, and I went to the Writers' Marketplace, which is a fat book that has listings of agents, and I just started to send things out and got so many rejections, and then finally somebody said, I will take a risk with you.
The audience also got a glimpse into the process of Chimamanda's writing and her impulse for making revisions.
It's difficult for me to let go. I mean, there are stories I still want to edit in this book. And with Half of a Yellow Sun, I remember doing rounds and rounds of revisions and having sent it up to my editor, and we had agreed that this was it. And shortly before the book was supposed to go to print, I called her and I said, I need to do one more round of revisions. And, and she said, Chimamanda, that's it. You just leave it alone.
When asked to mention a few of her favorite novels, Chimamanda gave 3 recommendations.
Arrow of God, Chinua Achebe's novel, Arrow of God, is one of my favorite novels. Decorations in a Ruined Cemetery by John Gregory Brown, I think is such a beautiful novel. And a novel called The African Child was also a favorite childhood book of mine, and it was by a writer from Guinea called Kamara Laye. So I think in some ways maybe those 3. I sort of just realized they're all by men, and my feminist spirit is very furious. But thank you all so much for coming. I appreciate it.